Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for those curious about creating a more fulfilling work life. Every business boils down to two basics, people and money. Here we focus on the human side. Numbers matter, but people matter most, and people drive performance. I'm Susan Nichriadon, your host, a coach, consultant, facilitator, and author of Leading Beyond the Numbers. It brings me joy to speak to people and explore together how, although we share many similarities as humans, each of us navigates the world through our own unique lens. This adds intricacy to our interactions and contributes to both the depth and difficulties of interpersonal relationships. Join us for stories, strategies, and insights to help you lead your life beyond the numbers. Well, today I am absolutely delighted to welcome Jay Perry to Life Beyond the Numbers. Jay, you're so welcome.
Oh, thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure to be here.
And before we kick off, I just want to say that I am grateful to my amazing sister, Shun Prohaska, who made the introduction.
Yes, we are both fans of Shun. So,
We are. Now, recently, just over the Easter bank holiday weekend, which is recently for me, I was listening to this podcast on the main radio station here in the UK, BBC4, and they talked about the power of questions, and even could they create the whole program simply of questions. But something that really struck me was they said that between the age of 2 and 5, we ask about 40,000 questions, which I don't know how they've measured that, but that seemed to be what the research says. And then as we become adults, that just diminishes considerably. And that adults probably ask less than 10 questions on average per day. What does that make you think about?
it makes sense to me. And what I like to say is I tell stories about stories, just to keep me from anybody accusing me of using false science or something like that. But since our primal brains are tasked with survival and being able to recognize potential threats in the world or what's going on in the world so it can make sense of it, it would make sense to me that young brains who haven't yet discovered those things and haven't really dug deep furrows in our neural network would be asking questions. It's part of survival. The brain is doing its job and doing it well. And there comes a time, I think, both culturally, because knowledge has for millennia been an ideal. The person that knows the most wins or is the most exalted. That we've been trained to come up with answers and spend less time in wonder. And wonder ends or at knowing. Once you think you know something, you tend not to wonder about it anymore. Now, thankfully, we have artists and scientists who keep asking those questions, which is phenomenal. But those stories get what I call archived. They get archived somewhere and they come up whenever they're called upon. Doesn't mean that they're that helpful. They have a utility, but the utility might be just keeping us safe or comfortable as opposed to helping us connect more deeply with another human being or understand another human being or write our book or whatever that might be. So it makes complete sense to me. I don't know if it's scientifically correct, but that's my story.
Yeah, it makes sense. And if you spend any time at all with a kid between the age of 2 and 5, you're inundated with questions.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. Why is probably 90% of them. And I suppose I get that we're learning and we're sponges and we're absorbing everything and it's to help us to survive. And I think there's something sad, though, about losing the wonder. And maybe that's my story, but there's something perhaps short-sighted in how we approach our days at work or in the work that we do if we're not asking questions. And I know you referred to scientists and people whose job it is perhaps to ask questions, but can it bring more value? And there's a leading question. How can it value or how can it add value into the workplaces, perhaps, Jay?
All right, I'm going to take two banana steps back to say that for me and my orientation, especially these days, is that life is and is all about story. It's the way we understand the world. It's sort of the DNA of consciousness. And what a story is, in the definition I'm using, is a story is language put to use. So, by that definition, all stories are useful. The question is, to what end? What is it useful for? So, a lot of our schooling has been built around, oh, let's learn a useful thing. And so, once we have that skill, we want to employ it in the universe. And the culture seems to agree with that. Now, I don't think there's ever been a time in history where things have changed so quickly and so much. I certainly can't keep up. But I think we do ourselves a disservice when we don't recognize that all of this has a utility. The question for me is always, is it the use that I want? Am I employing my stories in a way that make my life more wonderful, my family, my community, my world a more wonderful place? Or am I, in fact, some kind of drone? It's almost like the Matrix. Am I just living in that and employing those things because I get validation and I get to belong to this group of whatever class it is or whatever organization it is.
So, what I like there about, well, there's several things, but one thing in particular there is how you said, I'm asking myself, are my stories working for me to have my world more wonderful and the worlds of the people around me? How many people ask that question? Do I know if I'm a drone or I'm making my story work for me? And how do I know?
What a wonderful question. It's why I'm so strongly promoting this story awareness, because I don't think most of us think in terms of that. I think if you ask somebody, well, what's a story? They'll say, oh, and it's the thing that I read to my kids before they go to bed, or it's, Law and Order, or these are all stories, without regarding that every time we interact with something. If you go into a meeting with your boss, it's time to have your assessment. Something is happening. There are stories that are coming up from the archives at this point, and they are driving things. We don't tend to not think of them as stories. And again, I'm doing this out of utility because I think it's useful for me and for the people I work with to think in that way. Because then we can also recognize, and this is where it gets really sort of spicy, is that the stories drive our actions, but part of what they're doing too is they're impacting our brain chemistry. And our brain chemistry then impacts the next story. And we end up in this cycle that is not particularly a creative act. It can be. It can be incredibly creative. We have to use different parts of our brain and sort of be aware of it. And that goes back to the children. They tend to create stuff more easily. Let's play makeup. Let's play doctor. Let's play horseman, whatever it is. Stop me anytime because I can get lost in my own stories here.
No, no, no. I think that's amazing because I think kids will sit and imagine a world and they can create that whole world. And whether they're playing with Lego or another kid or drawing, whatever, they have no problem and they can explain it all to you. And then you ask adults to come up with something innovative in a workplace and they shut down often. And that's also like, how do we bring that wonder back into organizational life?
It's a great question. again, I come back to this basic. I have done a lot of thinking, a lot of work around this. I've led things I call wonder shops. And if you come back to this notion of wonder ends at knowing, it's really important to know stuff. I don't want to have to recreate how I tie my shoes every day or whether I should put on a jacket when I go outside. There's so many wonderful things to know. But as you're describing, once we stop wondering about certain things, stop questioning, we find ourselves in a place of comfort, perhaps, and perhaps that's the utility of our stories. At this point in my life, I don't want to be challenged. I don't want anything to be at risk. You always hear from people stories like, well, that's not the kind of person I am, or I'm just the kind of person who. And as you were describing to me earlier, there's lots of people who like to put people in categories because it's like, I understand that, oh, that person is an extrovert, therefore they are blah, 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 blah. I don't know that that helps necessarily in making a more wonderful world, but it might make sense of the world. The whole process of resolving cognitive dissonance is our brain just doesn't like that. Hang on, if I'm the hero of this story, how could I have done that?
And then when we're in a workplace situation and we're all the heroes in our story, how do we get past that
There's,
together?
yeah, there's so much at play there. There's a lot of science behind the notion of position, or what's a better word for it?
See?
Yeah, it's don't know why the word is escaping me. The status. Yes, you said it. Yeah, I just didn't understand it spoken in proper English. That there's actually, this is something I read in a book years ago, was that neurologically, the place in the brain where loss of status lives is so dangerous to the brain. I mean, it recognizes that as this huge danger because it shares the space with the taste of rotten food.
So, like disgust as well. So, there's a few things that really are
Right,
fundamental to us.
right. So, how do you work in a communal space when you have these competing forces of, well, I've just been named general manager, so I need to keep that status. And in this job, I'm asked to create, but creation can be scary because if I go outside the norm, what's going to happen? Am I going to get fired or frowned upon? Am I going to be thrown out of the tribe because I'm not thinking in the same way? And of course, in the States, we have this very visible example of people having to adhere to a certain code of behavior and speech in order to stay part of a certain group.
So, there's a
Humans are
collective,
weird.
yeah, there's a collective story that works for that collective. And if you're not part of that story, then that's your problem almost. The last time we spoke, Jay, we talked about something called Storysphere,
Yes.
which I think is kind of a nice lead on from where we are now. So, how would you describe Storysphere?
I'm I'm so glad you asked, and I'm really ticked off that you asked because when I confronted to this, let me take a shot at it that I've never tried before because I continue to attempt to communicate this simply and clearly. Is the word we're taking off from is atmosphere. And if you were to ask a stupid question like I ask sometimes, like how many molecules are there in the atmosphere? You get an answer like it's trillions of trillions, trillions times trillions of these molecules, and it's different at sea level than it is at the top of Mount Everest and stuff like that. But if you think about our relationship to the atmosphere, for the most part, it's invisible to us. We don't think about it unless there's a high content of bad stuff in the air or there's an odor or something like that. And yet, if we're asked a question about it, it's clear the only reason we're alive as a species is because of this atmosphere. It contains the things we need for life. So if you plot that onto the notion of a story sphere, you get that life is made up of story. The only way we know who we are, what our identity is, where we belong in the world, what something is. We have a story about all of these things. Again, it's the language put to use. And if you can pull back the camera or ask this question, well, how many stories are happening in the world right now? I don't have a way to measure it, but I just imagine it's trillions. And these are stories that come from our past, our culture. We've inherited them. Maybe they come from childhood or a news cycle, or most importantly for me now in the work I'm doing is the stories in our heads to try to locate them. But these stories I think of as archive stories, which come up and have such power over us, sometimes to the good, as I say, because it really is recognizing don't eat that food, that's bad for you, or just out of habit, impacting the brain chemistry, coming around, confirming the story, and keeping us limited in what's possible in our lives or in the world. So to me, that's why I've taken this word story sphere and trying to dive into it and discover what it is myself, because I think we're at great peril as a species, frankly, if we don't do a better job of understanding the role of story in our lives. It's so easy to adopt certain stories, again, for different human needs because we get to belong to the group if we believe that. It's so easy to tell stories to try to sell something to someone, whether that's an idea or a car or anything else. Think about dating sites. Thank God I'm not on the dating pool these days. But can you imagine everybody's trying to tell a story or tell a story that attracts something? And are you attracted to the person at that point? Are you attracted to the story of the person? So yeah, I know I'm sort of opening up a big can of something here, but even if you go back, Salman Rushdie wrote a book a number of years ago, I think after the first fatwa came up, called Harun and the Sea of Stories. Do you know this book?
No.
And it's about a boy whose father is a storyteller, a professional storyteller, and he disappears, if I remember correctly. And it turns out that there is this dark force in the world that is trying to eliminate stories. And it's this creeping darkness that is coming over. And the boy is out to find his father and restore the power of the story sphere. That's my Mr. Rushdie may have a very different view of that, but that's one of the things I took away from it. So I know I've said a lot of stuff. Let me pause and see what you're hearing here because you're such a great listener.
I think I come back again to so there's an archive of stories, right? We all have an archive of stories. There's collective stories, there's government stories, there's business stories, there's LinkedIn stories, which is like a whole other world. There's stories everywhere. And then there's what we associate with story, so that it's fiction often. So
Oh, underline, boldface. Yes.
yeah, yes. And but not when it comes to ourselves, because we're not a work of fiction. At least that's, I mean, my world might fall down.
Oh, Susan, I love that. I love that. Say
So,
more.
yeah. So I'm still curious about, and this is wonder, like it is pure wonder, at how do I recognize my stories, or even a story, or that there could be stories. And I'm a great believer, I'll say, in I can write a new story. However, I suppose, like you said, there are stories that are archived that perhaps we're not conscious of, that have released these chemicals in our brain and have kept us somewhere still
Yeah.
or stuck. And that is huge for people to get. And I don't know I'm doing that justice in this big, long, rambling
Oh no,
question.
I think you are. And again, I keep reminding myself and others that I'm telling stories about stories. I'm not trying to say that these are facts. But yes, I think you described that quite well. And even when we use the phrase, I think, often are we really thinking? Or is that just the archive story that has popped up and now we're just describing the story that has occurred to us? So we are in the matrix to a certain extent in that way. And there's hope. Our brains are amazing, and there are different parts of our brains that, when used properly or used effectively, can help create new stories. I know there's this sort of common meme, I guess, that, oh, well, tell a different story. And speaking to a gentleman named Angus Fletcher, who you may know, wrote one book called Story Thinking, and he's a brilliant guy. But he said something to me that was like, yeah, but you can't just make up any story. And I hope I'm doing him justice, but it's not quite that simple. If you just say, oh, now be positive, I'm going to make a positive story. If given how deeply those archive stories are grooved, you're not going to just make that shift by doing that. And that's why one of the things we've explored, once you sort of buy into this notion of research or discovery, personal research. Let me check this out and see what this is about. And then you begin to observe the stories at work. You just become aware. Oh, look at that story. How interesting. That's fascinating. Then what we employ is this thing we've been playing with for a long time called story catching, which is, can you actually get to that story before it gets to our brain chemistry? Can you intercept it in time to make a shift? And one of the things that inspired me to this was somebody who's an idol of mine, a symphony orchestra conductor named Benjamin Zander, who I've only met for a total of, I don't know, minute and a half, 2 minutes. And yet he's one of those people that had such a profound effect on me. And you can find it online somewhere. Just go Benjamin Zander, how fascinating. And he describes this, and the video I go back to, I must watch this 3 or 4 times a week. He's doing a master class with a young cellist, and he's an audience, and he comes up to the cellist afterwards, and he says, "You're just a magnificent musician. You're wonderful." And you notice that you made a mistake in there one time. And he went, oh, nobody can hear who's listening to this can see what I just did, but it was sort of he had a physical thing to making a mistake. His head went down, it drooped, and and Maestro Zander said, yeah, that's what happens to us. We have these physical chemical reactions to things like a mistake. And what he suggests as a story catching technique, now that's the term I coined for it, is, and he's about 6'4", I think, with these long arms, and he gets out of his seat, throws out his arms, and yells, "How fascinating!" And here's the theory I have behind this that we've been working with, is that there are some stories we can catch without much trouble at all, or we develop the ability to do that, where we can just sort of catch ourselves and go, or ah, yeah, or just smile, and we get it. But there are some of these stories that are so fundamental that if we don't employ sort of something that is robust enough to match the power of this story, it's going to go right past us. It's like we have to have the rock to that story. And it can be very playful. And I would love to be part of a culture where people did that all the time. And we celebrated the fact that people were catching stories. Now, right now, it seems a little embarrassing for most people. They go, but how can I do that at the office? I don't know what I'm going to do.
And that's the beauty of it, because you could make up a story for how to catch those stories as
Yes.
well, and make a game and see how many stories you could catch in a week and have a competition. Oh my gosh, there's just so much in what you've just talked about. And you said, I think. I want to just go back to that really, really briefly, because I notice that I say that a lot. But what I'm noticing at the moment that people say a hell of a lot is, if I'm being honest. Or I won't lie to you, but and I wonder, are these things like I think, or if I'm being honest, are they giveaways that we haven't thought about it, or we're not being honest, and we're finding that we must say those to underline the seriousness of something. I don't know. I'm noticing those phrases a lot. And yeah, let's just go into that for a little bit. And then I want to go back to Benjamin Zander.
Okay. Yes, there are all kinds of subtle lies that we tell or other people tell us, sometimes not so subtle, but for some reason we don't recognize them as lies. Certainly, there's a small lie in that, if I'm being honest. So I sort of, and it's a protection story, right? It's like I could just say, your hair looks terrible today, Susan. Or is a little bit more abrupt than, well, if I'm being honest, your hair doesn't quite look as good as it did yesterday, or something like that. So we tell these stories to soften the blow, but they're still judgmental stories, which is a huge part of the archive, is that we've learned to judge good, bad, right, wrong, should be, shouldn't be, all of those kinds of things. But there are other kinds of lies, like generalizations. Those people or all of those people, or one of my favorites living in the US is the American people. Oh, really? There is an American people that thinks the same way and does things the same way. Wow. Or everybody thinks this, or things like that. Or as our fearless leader likes to say, things are the most ever, is these exaggerations that we do. Again, we are not always trained to be masters of language, which is one of the key ingredients of stories, right? It's language put to use. So we have found ways to use language that are useful for some reason. Somehow somebody finds that by saying this is the greatest, that people go, oh, now I'm listening. Oh, fantastic. I'm for that. This is the greatest. Or stories of fear, the things I call story infections, stories of fear or diminution or hate. Any of the isms are story infections. These are bits of story or story that have gotten into us and create brain chemistry and create things that are very much about, I have to defend myself so strongly by making other people the enemy or smaller, or you have to be afraid of those people. So that's intrinsic to those kinds of stories. And if you train yourself to do that, it doesn't mean that you have to now judge people for lying. It's more an appreciation of how our brain works. And for me, all this work I've been doing is about becoming a better partner with my brain. I don't want to get rid of it. I can't get rid of it. If I got rid of it, like some people who've had lobotomies and lose the fear part of their brain, that's not good. They're going to walk down dark alleys in the middle of the night, not thinking anything about it. But how do we use these brains for that, but be able to catch the stories that we'd like to redirect into another use? And then how do we develop that creative part of our brain? Back to the children. We're going to keep coming back to that theme of that I can take those blocks and turn them into a castle.
I keep getting that image of the fish swimming around in water, and the other fish goes, "How's the water?" And then the fish says, "What water?"
What water?
It feels a bit like that. And also, if you're inside the bottle, you can't see the label, you can't read it. And so we're in our story sphere because each of us is a story sphere in our own right as well, in the way you talk about it, I think. And we've got judgmental stories, infection stories that are infections. We have meaningful stories. We have all sorts of stories about the stories.
And
And
maybe this is why people have avoided it for a while, because once you get into it, it is like the Matrix with the blue pill and the red pill. Are you ready to go down the rabbit hole and do this? Once you start, it's like it's everywhere.
yeah, it's never ending. It's the trillions and trillions you're talking about. And I mean, we have like trillions, maybe that's an exaggeration, of cells within us as well. So if every cell is a story, then they all have their use. I don't know. It's mind-boggling. And it brings me back to Xander, who talks about how everything is made up. And that's effectively what it is all of these institutions that we believe in and everything that's ever been written in a book or anything, we've all made it up some way along the line. So not only are we a story and a story sphere, everything around us is as well. Is there anything that isn't?
This is a story I love to ask people, and I keep challenging people. Can you tell me something that isn't a story? And people will go, well, like two and two is four.
Is it?
How is that
How do
not
we
a
know?
story?
Yeah.
I mean, we're assuming that we all operate in base 10, number one. If you're operating in base three, two and two, there is no four. So where do you go? There has to be something else. And something you said that just caught my ear, which was we all make up these stories. I don't think that's quite accurate, at least in my thinking, is that some of these stories have been made up and they have ceased to be stories to us. And that's where we lose our power with them.
That makes sense.
It's now that thing that is a given circumstance.
Mm.
I used to be a stage director, and when you learn to analyze plays, you have to start with, so what are the given circumstances? Hamlet actually says that in Act 3, Scene 2. Now, you might have the freedom to, as some people have done, scramble the script and do it in a different way there. But if you're going to choose that this script is a given circumstance, then you create with that and around it. And to one of your previous questions about how this might work in organizations, is I think it's really important to wonder about what are the given circumstances, what are the assumptions to this story. Because there is no story that exists without some assumption.
I used to have a boss that always said to me, never assume anything, Susan. It makes an ass out of you and an ass out of me.
Yeah. But again, we can't operate without assumptions. So, so there's something
Yeah.
important about that statement, but also something that can never be true because they're hidden, perhaps. But I assume I'm a man. I don't know. We do assume, and certainly in the past number of years, we've had some of those assumptions questioned quite vigorously. And I think to the betterment of us, but some people don't want to question certain assumptions at all. To their brains, it is literally like someone's holding a knife to your throat.
Mm,
For me to accept that assumption,
mm,
my brain thinks that's death.
mm. The whole how our brain functions, I think we're okay, well, we're human beings, I'm going to say that. And one of the ways, or the way we operate, is this brain and body that we have. And yet we've gotten this far, most of us, without really understanding a whole lot about how they work, other than the basics. And I imagine, again, a story that going forward, it is really going to be the way we think about the future of humanity is knowing more about how our brains and bodies work. Because that will help all of us see some of these things. One story I think about often is borders, the borders between countries, because they're just a story. There was no such thing as a passport. There was no such thing as a border. It still amazes me that we call skies and our seas when they belong to the world. Nobody came along and said, that's just America's sky or Ireland's sky. And I like these kind of things I spend time thinking about. So I suppose if I'm a listener now, and I'm really curious about what we're talking about because we're going all over the place, but actually, maybe what's my story sphere? Or is there a story that I could do with excavating? How do I go about that, Jay?
Again, I'm just wondering about this, and certainly people have wondered about this for a long time. And I think, what we think of as psychotherapy is a search for that. What are the foundational stories that so many other things are built on? And the theory is if you can find the foundational story, then you can open everything up. But until you do that, everything is constrained by that. And these foundational stories can be as simple as I'm not worthy, or there's something wrong with me. Or on the other hand, they can be more narcissistic, like I'm special, or something like that. So anything that doesn't agree with this fundamental story that I'm special, that there's something wrong with that. So what's wrong with those people? They can't see that I'm special. I think it's to our benefit that this is something that is happening all the time. And so if we want to get into this discovery, we can work with whatever's there first. And you'll just notice that there is a story that seems to be common, or there's a story of limitation in some way, and there's something in you that wants to go beyond that. So we can explore with that. The story catcher routine that we were talking about with Maestro Zander, one of the things I love about observing him is that he's using physicality, his voice, his emotion, and his intention, sort of for trying to answer this question that you asked.
Hmm.
So there are these four things, and in a way, by doing this, we are saying to our brains, as a partner with our brains, pay attention over here. We got to give the brain something more interesting than that old story. People often try, I've seen, and many of my clients, and I was very slow to pick this up, but we try to find our way to change our stories using cognitive abilities. Like it's all going to happen in our brains. And here we have all of these other senses: musicality, smell, olfactory, and what gustatory, physical, vocal, all of that stuff, emotional. And if we engaged our full selves in it, then I think our brains can respond to it in a different way.
And the connection is stronger when there's more than one
Yep.
sense involved. And it's something that I noticed myself was I was getting things cognitively and yet unable to change, perhaps. So I was aware of the story, but not making the progress that I wanted to. And then suddenly something just clicks, but it's never in the mind. It was more of, for me, a felt sense or a knowing, an inner
Yes.
knowing that then it's like that story just evaporates. My brain doesn't need anything else. Everything now gets it. And I find that fascinating. And like you're saying, trying to bring something else in other than the mind.
And I find it's useful to have certain life stories to anchor on. What I ask people to do if they're going to do so that the actual name of the site that we're opening in a few weeks is called Storysphere Central. It's like this is the place you come to explore all of these different things. One of the questions we'll ask people is, what's a story that changed your life? So that we have these anchor stories, we can actually recognize the power of a story. And I've got maybe half a dozen in my life I can go back to that to me, it was clear that the line was going one way and then it just took a deep right turn or a left turn or a dive or went skyward. And one of those you just brought to mind was I was on a ropes course many years ago, and we had to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning or something to go out on this ropes course. And of course, it was very well supervised, incredibly safe. But the first event I went to was the rappelling when you go down the cliff on a rope. And my being was so threatened by that that I was off to the side of this circle where everybody was there to support each other. I couldn't stay in it because I had to throw up. I mean, I was like, my body was reacting to this. It's going, you don't do this. This is crazy. But because of the group pressure, I finally got back in there. And fast forward to the moment at the edge of the cliff where they've told me everything I need to do. And you put this hand here and this hand here. And I say, lean back. And I leaned back a little bit. And they said, great. Now let go of the rope. And I went, okay. And my hand did nothing. And that went on for a little bit. They had to talk me to do that. And eventually I just let go of the rope and I started going down. And there was a moment there of total freedom. Suddenly my body wasn't afraid anymore. And that cliff was way too short. You know, I could have been 10 times that. I was having so much fun.
Isn't that amazing? And you were the person who would never do that before that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's story after story that I can recall was that interruption of that's not who I am.
Yeah. And I read your book, Take Charge of Your Talent, that you've co-authored. And one of the things you say in that really struck me was your talent lives inside a story. So that's something I wonder, like, are there talent stories? How do we find that story? And is that a physical thing too?
It can be, and I would never try to paint everyone with the same brush. I mean, I think we have magnificent differences, and we seem to have things that are strengths that are easier to access, or they may be things that are related to like I'm 5'3". I don't think I ever, no matter what story I told, participate in the National Basketball Association, except as the ball boy or something. Maybe a coach. I could go there a little bit. So it's Tim Galway who uses this little formula, capital P equals small p minus I, which stands for performance equals potential minus interference. So the story called Potential, which I've heard many people question whether there is such a thing, but at least it's a way of looking at it and going, okay, so I'm not sure that I can perform to that level, but instead of like trying harder or working out more, that what if I just remove the interference? What if I got that stuff out of the way? Stories are often the interference.
Even as you say that, I feel myself exhale with relief. And yeah, I like there because that story you told about not being the person who could go off the cliff is interference. Yeah, with good reason. I mean, physically,
Yeah.
you felt ill. So it isn't to be dismissed. And it's not like, kind of straighten up and carry on or the stiff upper British lip they talk about and that kind of thing. Because the stories are entwined with who you are. And if your body is going to physically react, then that has to be taken into account. So I suppose what I'm getting at is dismissing our stories isn't the way to tackle them either.
Right. I'm sure you can see that from my perspective, I've just scratched the surface of this. I'm still feel like I'm a beginner investigating this, but it feels like because my role has been for the last 35 years as a personal coach is how do I help people exceed their own expectations? How do I help people have more wonderful lives and help create a more wonderful world? And I'm sure you know better than I do how many books there are on the market and how many theories and how many practices and all which I'm sure have certain value. So I wouldn't denigrate any of those things. But I have yet to find something, and this is why this is so attractive to me, that seems to be at the source of it. I figure if I can get my hands on these levers, then I really am driving this thing. And for the people who have mastered some parts of this but have more selfish intents or maybe even evil intents, not sure I'm ready to go there, but if we're not up to that task, if we're not up to understanding that in a more profound way so that we can be the antidote to those infections, you know, we're not that far from the precipice.
Seems like a very somber note to get to, Jane, with just a few minutes to go.
But that then I come back to though that this is all made up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I can say what the stakes are. I can say, yeah, climate change really is that these stakes are high, or autocracy in the world, these stakes are really high. Or I can just refocus on play with my cats.
Yeah.
That's my story.
Sounds
Cats
like a
create
wonderful.
they create oxytocin unless they're scratching and biting, but and that's wonderful. You feel great. If you look at the videos that you tend to go to online on Instagram or Facebook, or if you are someone who does that thing, just notice what stories you click on, and you'll notice sort of what story creates the chemistry in you that you're looking for. I know my wife loves huskies, the husky videos where they're doing all that stuff. And I don't know whether it's oxytocin or dopamine, but some get something out of these things.
Yeah, follow the joy.
Yeah.
Yeah, follow what brings you joy, and that creates the wonder as well. And I think it's probably one of the ingredients of wonder. So, you've touched on your project just a little bit, and we never even went into your whole life story, Jay. But maybe before we end, you just talk about that project a little more, because by the time this episode goes out, this may well be up and running.
Yeah. I had to be educated by people who were much more digital natives than I, that you don't actually need a website these days for certain things. You don't need a website, just build it on a platform. What's that about? So I was led to discover this thing called Kajabi, and there are a number of platforms out there, I understand, which gives you so much creative ability and visually, it doesn't quite get engineered this way, but visually for me, the notion of Storysphere Central is that you come to the art center, or this is the story center, actually. And when you're there, you're with a community of people who like to go to that place. Just like if you go to an art museum, there are other people there who like to look at paintings. You're not going there and then finding wrestling breaking out in the middle of the Greek sculpture garden. And in here, we want to give you lots of things to explore. And so there will be chat available. Eventually, we're going to have a number of different rooms, but there will be all kinds of offerings. There'll be a calendar, so you can look at today's calendar, the calendar of the week, or the calendar of the month, and see what you'd like to explore. There may be offerings for meditation, because meditation is one way to reduce story infection, among other things. There may be co-working spaces. There may be story improv things, like a writing improv thing where I would say, okay, Susan, let's play with this today. You have a pair of eyeglasses, chewing gum, and a picture of your parents. Write a one-page story about this. Well, I'll come back and we'll do this so that we exercise our creative being. So
I won't be going to
again,
that room.
the ideas are endless for me right now, and the idea is to build a community. That's the key here. And so it is a bit of a tricky business, I think, because you have to build a community, but you have to build the resources, but you could have way too many resources for the community or the other way around. So trying to find a way to build it with integrity and by providing value and have it be an enjoyable space for everybody to explore these things. And then as part of the community, again, the plan is to invite the community to create their own experiences. That somebody comes to us and says, I want to offer something on on this. It's great. If it's in accord with the purpose of what we're doing here, fantastic. It's starting as, we have to have somebody who instigates this, but the hope is to have this not be top down and not lecturing to people about things, but really have what's there be a product of what the community wants.
It sounds cool. And just before we wrap up, the thing that is coming to me is we didn't talk about story not necessarily being performance, because I think a lot of people put the two together. And I wonder if you could maybe speak to that for a moment, Jay.
Performance. Well, again, I tend to see story everywhere, so it's not limited to that. Although I have been a performer and a stage director and been in a band and all that kind of stuff. So I love musical stories. I think every one of the exercises we've played with is we present a series of photographs to people and they tell you the story that comes up from the archives first, and then they create a completely different story with it. So yeah, I think that those two things can get collapsed, performance and art of some kind, but you're performing all the time with your own stories in a way. That's what's driving your performance. And whether it's performance that is irritating to some people or inspiring to some people, or whether it's at a high degree of visibility or low degree of visibility, it's all part and parcel of the same, I think, the same paradigm. And we can continue to learn and learn and learn and tell stories and listen to stories, appreciate people's stories. That's one of the things that'll be in the Storysphere. Sometimes people just need an ear. They need to be able to tell their story to someone. May not even need anyone to give them an answer or feedback or anything. They just need a place to tell their story. So I think there's a connection to performance, but it certainly isn't limited to that.
There's no formula, I suppose, is what I'm kind of getting at to the story. Your
Right.
story or your stories are yours, and you can tell them in the way that works for you.
Yeah, now there are many people who are great storytellers and people who teach storytelling, and I think there is an art to that of how you take the story you're telling and have the impact that you want to have on a population. But it's not the only thing.
Mm. Amazing. Jay, we are out of time, over time slightly. And so if people would like to know more about you, the work that you do, what's the best way to connect with you?
I think for now, this may change in the coming days, but Jay at storycatchers, plural, .net is an email address that's working now. And anybody I hear from will give you an opportunity to be notified as soon as there is an open door to the center.
Which sounds great. Like, yeah, cool. Gee, thank you so much.
Oh, gosh, thank you.
Yeah, I loved where we went to today, and there's so many unanswered questions and more questions to come and stories. So, yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you for joining me today on Life Beyond the Numbers. If something in this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave a review. It helps others like us discover this podcast and join in our conversation. Until next time, keep exploring the human side of work life.